We know that managing your weight, especially if you have a lot of excessive weight, it's a very real condition. It is progressive by its very nature. If you've seen any of my videos, I've talked about the progressive nature. The regulatory signals in the brain that help you manage your weight long term, they become more dysfunctional as you gain more and more weight. So your body becomes more further entrenched in that higher weight zone. And so it becomes harder. And then you add in aging, as you've already alluded to, and it makes it more difficult, right? Your hormones change, etc. So, if they have a large amount of excess weight, we talk about using pharmacologic therapy, right? So many of the medicines I talk about, we talk about if the risk is high enough, bariatric surgery, and they've followed groups of people who had it and other groups who didn't, and they compare the results. And the people who had bariatric surgery, these two groups started out very comparable in terms of their health risks and their weights. I presented this data today. It was a collection of many, many studies, right? So it's an aggregate of studies we call meta-analysis. It showed that the people who decided to get the surgery, as opposed to the ones who couldn't get it for whatever reason, the ones who got it, they live longer, almost a decade longer, guys, if they have diabetes and got the surgery. A decade longer. That's insane. A decade longer. Or they lived half a decade longer, even if they didn't have diabetes and they got the surgery. And that's compared to people who were very similar in health and weight and who chose not to manage their weight with surgery. So, listen, I'm not here to fearmonger you into getting surgery. I'm not here to make surgery sound better than it does or better than it is or without risk. Obviously, any intervention, anything that you do to your body is going to carry some amount of risk, right? And what we have to do at the end of the day is weigh the risks and benefits. Are there tragic cases where people have died during or shortly after an operation? Yes. Is it increasingly small as the surgical techniques have improved, as the experience with these various surgeries have improved? Yes. In fact, bariatric surgery is as safe as any other abdominal surgery we do today within medicine, bar none. That is a fact. That is actually not debatable statistically. It is as safe as getting your gallbladder removed, getting your appendix removed, and we do those thousands of those surgeries a day, and no one bats an eye. Oh yeah, I'm going to get my gallbladder out. Oh yeah, you're going to have your vertical sleeve gastrectomy. It should be talked about in a very similar vein, but it isn't. And I think that's a lot of this legacy bias and stigma around surgery for weight loss, right? And managing the disease of obesity. So I don't know you. I don't know anything about you, and it's not my place to tell you what to do. But if you are someone who is of advanced age, who has tried in a number of attempts to lose weight and has struggled, I would certainly consider one of these more advanced therapies, including but not limited to medication and bariatric surgery. For people that have huge appetites, really struggle, especially when they've tried to diet before, they just become insatiably hungry, have huge appetites. I really like Qsemia for people. It really seems to knock people's appetites out. Qsemia is the branded drug that combines both phentermine and topiramate. I think it's super helpful in augmenting the appetite system. Saxenda is also very effective in that way. So those are kind of my two go-tos for people who have very robust appetites or who try to diet and then just get like really hungry and really feel miserable. Those two drugs do a very good job working on multiple parts of the appetite system. They don't work on just one part. They help decrease the amount of hedonic eating. So you're not just like having all these cravings and you're not just a crazy emotional eater, or you're not feeling like this overwhelming or gnawing hunger pain throughout the day because you're just trying your best to eat healthier and cut down your food. They really help with that. They help take the edge off. And that's how a lot of these drugs, like in many ways, it's enough of a support that you're able to manage all the lifestyle changes you need to make. And so most people, like I say, when it works really well, they're saying, like they come to me and they're in shock. They're like, it's the first time I've been able to diet and it hasn't been a miserable experience. I'm not just like craving like chips the moment I go out to eat or something, or wanting to just down the whole bread basket, and I don't blame them. It's the natural body's response. It's your body's natural response to consider your reduced body weight as a foreign state. So your body counteracts that by increasing your hunger, increasing your appetite, decreasing your satisfaction with similar meals. Whereas before you would be totally satisfied, now you may not be satisfied and feel like you have to eat more. That's all in an attempt and an effort to make you gain that weight back that you're trying to lose. So that's why people struggle. It's not a willpower issue. It's not a, I'm not working hard enough. That stuff's totally BS and it's not based on the science. So that's just, often that comes from people's privilege. Their privilege and their lack of understanding, lack of empathy, inability to walk a mile in someone else's shoes. I think, and one of the really cool things, really cool and honestly a little bit silly, are these trainers, these muy mas macho men trainers. Have you guys seen any of these documentaries? Please comment down below if you have. I'd really be curious. There have been these muy mas macho male trainers who have done this fat to fit the fat journey or whatever that they are calling it. There have been a few documentaries about this. And actually what's really cool to see, I don't recommend it, but is really cool to see is they become incredibly humbled through the experience and they realize how much harder it is after they've gained the weight to then lose it. Whereas their whole lives, it's been easy for them to manage their weight. Yeah, you know why? They have great genetics. Oh my gosh, good for you. You have a six pack, and your muscles are bulgy. You have great genetics. Congrats, you won the lottery. But like this one guy on TikTok who did this whole transformation, he gained a bunch of weight. He has really struggled to lose the weight. If you follow his last video I saw of him, he was just like crying hysterically. He was like, I had no idea how hard it was. And this is a guy who's genetically gifted and he struggled to lose weight, right? Like there is a biological basis in resistance to weight loss. Why? There's a lot of speculation. Most of it's based on our evolutionary history of humans. And so I think that unfortunately our biology hasn't caught up with the times, right? We don't need to be as resilient in defending our weight like we used to be, where it used to be a death trap to lose weight. It's not a death trap and a death sentence anymore. We're not going to starve to death like we would 1,000 years ago. So unfortunately, that is the state of our biology and we have to deal with it regardless. Intuitive eating kind of falls in the same spectrum as health at every size, intuitive eating. They're sort of on a spectrum of beliefs around how people can manage their health and their weight. I have no problem with intuitive eating or health at every size from a principle, from a theory. People can be healthy at many different weights. We know there are people who are metabolically healthy and are at very high weights who have no health problem. You otherwise can't find a single health problem on them other than the fact that they're carrying a lot of weight. That's it. There are people who are thin who have every single metabolically unhealthy issue, right? So health at every size is absolutely a thing. There is no question. With that said, okay, we can acknowledge that people can be healthy at many different weights, and we can also acknowledge the very real health risks of having excess weight and being at unhealthy weights. And actually, we know even if you are metabolically healthy and are very heavy, even if that's the case, your risk of having heart disease later in your life and developing metabolic issues later in your life is much higher than someone at a lower BMI. So their risk is not the same as someone who is otherwise at a normal weight for their size. So what I don't want to do is for us to conflate the concept that individuals should feel good about themselves, should develop their own feelings about self-worth and value with the fact that they're struggling with a very real health condition. Those are very different things. But unfortunately, in society, we sort of lump them together and say that based on the way you look, based on your size, all of these sort of aspects about appearance that somehow determines your value or self-worth, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Frankly, no one determines your value or self-worth but you. And the problem is we have all these sort of competing thoughts about it. And frankly, I like to disassociate the health aspects from how people view themselves. And those are really two different things, but they often get lumped together, and it's unfortunate, but that's the shallowness of our society. So In principle, do I have any issues with it? No. Intuitive eating, eating what makes sense, eating healthfully if it makes sense, not restricting yourself, I have no issues with it. If someone doesn't want to lose weight, I have no issues with that. If people gain weight because they've been through a lot, I have no issues with it. I made a video on that. Like it's totally normal and reasonable thing to struggle with your health in the middle of a global pandemic. Like what? Of course it is. The fact that we would hold that against someone is insane. Can we acknowledge that maybe the weight they've gained is something they may need to be aware of and address at some point? Sure. But we don't have to judge them for it. Like we don't have, that's the thing, that's the issue I have with this whole conversation is there's too much judgment in general. Well, we know this isn't true. We know that's not based in science. There's a study done by Kevin Hall's group out of the NIH that looked at a basically a high carb diet that was plant based versus a low carb diet that was more animal based, and the high carb diet caused an increase in insulin. So if you listen to any of these low carb docs, you'd be like, oh no, increase in insulin. Insulin causes weight gain. Oh my gosh. And while the individuals who did the high carb diet, the plant based diet, had increases in insulin, they actually had more fat loss over the 2 week period than the people that did the animal based ketogenic diet. And so, and that was despite eating a high amount of carbs. So there's nothing inherently obesogenic, as I would call it in the scientific term, of carbohydrates. What I would tell you is, and this is where people get into trouble, is they eat very refined carbs or they eat processed foods that have highly refined carbs or sugars in them. That's where people tend to overeat because these foods are cheap, they're readily available, they taste great, they are very poor in in nutrients. So they have like virtually no nutrients in them, and they're very high in calories. And so it's like this very potent cocktail for disease, right? Like it's like everything you could want in something that creates disease. It's like if you wanted to take something toxic and put it in your bodies, that is the Western diet. And so when you look at the standard American diet, which is composed significantly of these highly processed foods, these pizzas, these donuts, these cookies, these chips, these bars, granola bars, even that are marketed as healthy. Nope, they're highly processed. They're very nutrient poor. They're highly nutrient dense. They're really not good for you. Does that mean you can't ever have them? No, doesn't mean that. But I'm saying the issue with our food environment is not carbs, it's not fats, it's not proteins, it's the quality of the foods. We're consuming far too much from these processed foods, not enough from these whole foods that are better for us, that have more nutrients, that are less, have fewer calories, that keep us more satisfied so that we don't overeat, that give us all the things, the vitamins, the minerals that our body needs. We don't need enough of them. And that's the real problem. And that's the real tragedy of our current food environment. We're eating about 50%. If you look at the data from the government, we eat about 50% of our calories from these processed food sources. The sources I told you that were quite literally manufactured for you to consume, and in many ways are manufactured to create disease. And so that's my take on that. So I would strongly disagree with your doctor. That sounds like a doctor who has a very dogmatic stance. Um, I am not dogmatic. I am diet agnostic, and I follow the science. And what the science shows is that you can lose weight with carbs. I actually have a lot of patients that lose weight on very high carb diets. It can be done. It's done every day, and so yeah, they're just not supported by the science. Your doctor could be a very good person. They may be out of their element when it comes to nutrition. Most doctors are because we don't get formal education on nutrition in medical school. So if your doctor is acting like they're an expert in nutrition, they're no more of an expert in nutrition than any of you all are. They've looked at all the same articles online and stuff. So I would be careful with what your doctor is telling you about how to eat. That's not to say there aren't some doctors that know better. I'm certainly someone who got extra training and studying in this particular in nutritional science and everything. That's part of my board specialty. But most doctors are going to have very little knowledge about lifestyle. It's just because we don't get good training. It's a problem. They should. They should have knowledge. They should get that training. They don't, though.